Hey everybody, welcome to week 6. We're covering the legislative branch today. And before we really begin, I do want to cover some concerns that were brought to my attention regarding the discussion posts and just the content at large. It is hard to avoid some contemporary partisan issues, especially when we when we discuss issues through the discussion posts. As you can tell, a lot of my questions have been generally vague, and they're asking you to identify your belief in regarding to the current state of these systems or something along those lines generally, compare and contrast the time we examined before in one of the lectures and contemporary politics, something along that nature. Some of you have decided to reference some hot topic contemporary political issues, and that's okay. But we're going to continue to practice making our explanation of our positions as objective and policy based as possible. That's why I'm doing this. I understand that these first discussions are going to have moments where the discussion gets a little inflammatory, but that's intentional because gradually through our comments and our constructive criticisms, we're going to be able to better present our opinions and be able to present our opinions to those who disagree in a professional and responsible manner. That's what I'm aiming for. I want you to start by just yelling what you think. And when I comment on your grade, I will tell you how to make that a more professional position, not make it a position that I agree with more. I will always fight for your right to disagree with me. And there's a lot of diverse positions you can identify in this class. And you have the right to fall on fall anywhere you would like when it comes to your policy positions. But I want to be able to represent them respectfully and responsibly. And that's what we're doing in the discussion. So, of course, as always, with any concerns, questions, or thoughts, bring them to me, email me. I will always give you the time of day. I will write books of emails just to explain myself, explain the content, explain other students. And I really just hope we can understand why I have some of these assignments in this class, why I do the lecture as I do. And it's really just intended to make you a better citizen and strengthen your ability to represent your position, not believe what I believe. So let's go, let's keep studying, and let's learn about our legislative branch. All right. So real quick, a little review of what we learned last week. I'll be very quick as we go through this because we got a lot to cover today. What are the primary positions within the executive branch? We have the president, vice president, the cabinet bureaucracy, and on the state level, we have the governors. And if you wanted to be the president, you have to be a natural born citizen, 35 years or older, and be a resident of the U.S. for 14 years. What happens if there's a tie within the Electoral College? Well, the House of Representatives votes to break that tie. We have this because of our 12th Amendment, which was implemented in response to the 1796 and 1800 elections. We see what are the primary powers of the President of the United States? Well, it's a wide range of powers, but they are concentrated to a degree. We see there are some wartime powers, veto powers. They have pardons, reprieves, commutations. They can nationalize the National Guard. They can recognize states and sign treaties. They can set the agenda through the State of the Union, sign executive orders. The quiz will likely ask you to answer to list about 3 of these, so make sure you understand a good handful of presidential powers. And when we look at keeping the president in check, there is something called the impeachment process, which is a 2-step process. Vote within the House of Representatives on general impeachment. 2, vote in the Senate for removal from office. If you Google that question on the quiz, I will know because it will tell you 4, 7, or 6. The real answer to the scope of this class is 2. We're looking at the general structural steps. House, Senate, impeached. Nobody's ever been impeached completely. Nobody's ever been removed from office. We have had 3 presidents that have gone through the first part in the House and were voted to be impeached, although they were their term either ended or they stepped down before, or they stepped down or they were acquitted before the Senate got to their vote. Now, you saw Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump. Those are the 3 presidents who have been impeached. Donald Trump got impeached twice within the House of Representatives, acquitted both times in the Senate. Richard Nixon had impeachment trials brought forward, but he resigned before they could develop. No president has been removed from office. What is the bureaucracy? How many individuals are there in the bureaucracy? There are roughly 2.1 million if you include the post office, 2.5 million. In the bureaucracy are individuals who work for the executive office, but they are not directly reliant on appointments by the president. They are hired by merit and they're general federal employees. We also see the cabinet, in contrast, are roughly 26 seats that can be vacant or can be filled. Sorry, pop up on my computer. But they're appointed directly by the president. They act as advisors to the president. They run executive administrative agencies, and they must be confirmed by the Senate. We are seeing a lot of Donald Trump's cabinet appointments being confirmed by the Senate right now. The last few, I think Kash Patel was one that just very recently happened. I think he was the most recent. But we also see that there was a historical event that led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. We know this because we studied this under one of the examples of an executive order. George Bush signed an executive order to create the Department of Homeland Security in response to 9/11, the tragic events that happened on 9/11 in 2001. And this was officially established by Congress in 2002, showing how Congress can act as a reaffirming check on executive orders. We also remember we went over many executive orders from numerous presidents. I repeat, numerous presidents, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, that were struck down by the courts. So executive orders are a point in which there is I wouldn't say gray area, but they do a wide range of tasks, and the court system is tasked with acting as a check on executive powers, especially through executive orders. And then how can the legislative and judicial branch maintain oversight over the executive? Judicial is easy. It's always the same. They determine the constitutionality of executive orders. Just like with the legislative branch, the judicial branch determines the constitutionality of legislation. Now, we also see that the legislative branch can act as a check on the executive branch by impeaching, by maintaining a check over judicial appointments and treaties. They have the power of the purse, so all funding matters should be granted to the legislative branch. They can override a presidential veto and various checks of that nature. So here's your quick review. Let's keep going. Make sure you remember this stuff from last week. And here are those answers. All right, here are the learning objectives for this week. I'm just going to keep going to save some time. But structures of the legislative branch. This is a bit of review. We remember bicameralism, which is that the legislative branch is broken into two distinct bodies. These bodies consist of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The apportionment of representatives is different within each body. The House is based off of population, while the Senate is based on equal distribution among states. The House, due to how many members it has far more organizational structure. There are more committees, there's more clear structure and more hierarchy because we have 435 individuals, while in the Senate, we don't have the need for as much structure as we only have 100 individuals. And simply put, it's a lot easier to get people to work together when there's only a quarter of the amount of people. The House acts as a voice for the people. You often see regionally, you see smaller districts that enable representatives to be more specifically focused on the sentiments of that population. You can see that when you look at an American, you could have two people selected at random, and they're likely to be very different. Now you look at a Kalispell, Montana voter. You take two people at random, they are far more likely to be similar-minded individuals. So that is how you could see that House representatives, they represent smaller districts. They are more representative of the ideology and partisan sentiments of those districts. Now the Senate is elected 2 representatives for the entire state, for every state, so they tend to be more representative of a wider range of individuals. They tend to act as a cooler to the House. There is a classic metaphor in political science that a tea setup where you have the cup and the saucer, the little plate that you put the cup on. No, none of us actually use this, but in movies, when they're super fancy and they got all the money, that's what they're drinking tea out of. Yep. So the House you can see as the teacup. It's very hot. Every now and then you have a little spillover. It's emotional. We'll go over that in a second. and it has a little bit of spillover, a little bit of excess. Now, the saucer cup underneath that teacup is intended to catch that tea and cool it down in the plate. And think of the Senate as that cup, that saucer, I think it is. And the Senate will catch that spillover and tame it. A good way to see this through policy is the House may impeach a president pretty quickly. The Senate will, they have the power, and they likely do, they always have in our past, will acquit that president for their impeachment, and act as a calmer voice to the sentiments and passions of the House. Now, do not list that as one of the key differences between the two bodies. When I ask you that on a quiz, I want you to tell me how many representatives, their terms, proportional, or equal distribution. And now that we understand what Congress is generally, let's look at some of the specific powers allocated to this body of government. We see one of the main powers, the public education function. Congress is intended to inform the public of the inner workings of our government and to make sure we understand how to rework that and restructure our government to best fit our interests. They do this through congressional hearings, gathering information. Think of what you saw in the past when you saw Mark Zuckerberg or many tech owners and CEOs answering recently with TikTok CEO answering questions in front of Congress. That is not an official judicial hearing, but is a congressional hearing in which they are intending to give the general public information through these oversight committees and these hearings. We also see that one of the powers granted to Congress is their power to declare war. They can raise and regulate an army and a navy. They also ratify treaties that are signed by the president. This is a power that has been historically granted to Congress, but we have seen the president, through his executive powers, make wartime decisions during times of significant conflict. But the official power to declare war is granted to Congress, although they have not declared war in recent years. We also see that Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce and international trade. That might be confusing off the top of your head, but interstate commerce is trade between states. So we know that our federal government operates on a state and a federal level. You have a federal Congress, but there are many instances where you have state Congresses as well. You can elect individuals to the Montana House of Representatives, but they do not work in DC, they would work in Helena. So interstate commerce, we see that the state legislatures that work in Helena, Montana, they would be able to have influence over what can be sold in their state, what can be manufactured in their state, but they cannot influence what can be brought in from other states, what can come from their state and be traded to another. Our federal Congress has the power to regulate interstate commerce, which is the trade between states. So a good example of this is with marijuana legislation. You see some states that might be bordering each other that are both have similar marijuana laws. They are both legal. It is still illegal to transfer those products between those states because that is an issue of interstate commerce. And on the federal level, marijuana sales are still illegal. So we see that is an example of them regulating interstate trade, which is the trade between states, and international trade, the trade between our nation and other nations. In contemporary politics, you've heard discussions regarding tariffs a lot. This is one of the powers that currently being utilized by the executive branch, but is also primarily granted as a power to the legislative branch. We also see the legislative branch has oversight powers. They have the power to research and make sure that the legislation that they have drafted and passed in the past, I don't like how I said that past legislation is being enforced adequately. They can hold hearings and, as you've heard many times, oversight hearings in which they pull these individuals, a lot like the example I gave regarding Mark Zuckerberg, the TikTok CEO, and many individuals who are brought to Congress to answer questions in front of our legislatures. And they also have the power to determine the number and apportionment of federal judges and Supreme Court justices. We do not hear much discussion about this in recent years. Even in the past 5 or so years, we haven't heard much discussion regarding stacking the courts. But this is a power that has been brought to question a couple times about possibly utilizing it when there is hyper-partisan or biased representation in the courts, according to the people who advocate for it. So that would be the argument that people wanting to stack the courts through this power would make. We have had numerous points throughout our history in which we had a fluctuation in the number of Supreme Court justices. We cover the Supreme Court next week, and we will cover that then. They also have the power over naturalization and citizenship processes. We see this as one of the primary roadmaps for citizenship is evident in our 14th Amendment, which was drafted and passed by our legislatures. And we also see that they have the power to determine how our specific legislation and statutory code will address this issue. They also have approval powers over appointments made by the president. This is exclusively the Senate, but the Senate does have to approve every cabinet appointment in addition to every federal judgeship and every Supreme Court justice. And the overarching, most impactful, and most obvious power granted to Congress is that they have the power of the purse. They impose taxes and tariffs, they borrow funds, they print currency and regulate its value, they determine bankruptcy laws. They are the individual, they are the body that determines how our federal government will spend money. They have to pass budgets. The budget is often the issue that leads to government shutdowns when they cannot reach compromise and results in a government shutdown in which a lot of the bureaucracy no longer is able to work for a short time period. Now, this is one of the most clear and impactful powers granted to Congress. A lot of the executive powers granted to the president are regulated up until there is a point where there is immense spending. One example of this is the president has the power to send troops into war for up to 60 days. And if they do not have congressional approval after 60 days, there's a 30-day period in which they will have to pull back the troops. That is an example of how there can only be so much spending under an executive order or an executive action until you need congressional approval to continue with it. So, what does the necessary and proper clause establish? Well, necessary and proper clause is also referred to as the elastic clause that is found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the United States Constitution, and when simplified, it grants the federal government the power to do whatever is necessary and proper to protect the nation. Actually, there is a slight typo. It grants Congress the power, as you can see in that bullet point. The Congress shall have power. So it specifically is granting Congress the power to do whatever is necessary and proper to protect the nation. This provided the basis for expanding the national government especially in the early 1900s. We also see this constitute a check on the expansion of presidential powers because we see this at times acting as a tool for the expansion of congressional power to act as a check on the president. Now, our necessary and proper clause states directly, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution and government of the United States or in any department or of thereof. It's cut off. I don't even know what it says. But we see the elastic clause grants Congress the power to make laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution foregoing powers and all the powers vested by the Constitution. Basically, they can do whatever is necessary and proper to protect the state and the citizens of it. We see this is a good simplified example is after 9/11, we saw the nationalization of airport security reliant upon the necessary and proper clause. We saw that airport security varied based on the airport you went through. Some airports would not have you do anything. You wouldn't check a bag. You never had to take your shoes off. Even I'm too young to remember this. Most of you probably are too. But after that, the national tragedy in 2001, airport security was nationalized and heavily restricted, and it had to be consistent among every single airport. That is an example of our federal government expanding their powers in response to national security threats reliant upon bits of our Constitution like the necessary and proper clause. But it is very important to remember the necessary and proper clause grants Congress the power to do whatever is necessary and proper for carrying into the execution foregoing powers of our Constitution. So let's talk about the general structures of these bodies, and let's start with the House of Representatives. So we can see first off that the United States House of Representatives consists of 435 members, a number that has not been changed since 1959, and even then it hadn't been changed for a good bit of time, as we have put a cap on the number of representatives in our House, although we have seen rapid increases in population. Uh, so we have seen in early American history, James Madison advocated for one representative to every 30,000 constituents. That number is immensely skewed today and is not what we were able to maintain. We did see that in 1959, we did increase our members of the House of Representatives 437 for a brief time when Hawaii and Alaska became part of the U.S. But this was evened out during the following census, and we were bounced back to 435 members. We see every census year we re-examine the allocation of members in the House of Representatives, but instead of adding seats, we move them around. In the most recent census, the state of Montana actually obtained one additional House representative, and California lost one. So we saw our increasing population be accounted for after that census. In the House of Representatives, when we elect candidates, we elect them for 2-year terms. And we remember that this apportionment is based off population. These candidates represent niche small districts. You think of northwestern Montana is one in which a House representative would represent. So we see that when we look at our House of Representatives on the federal level, they are currently controlled by Republicans as we have a united government. The executive and both bodies within the legislative branch are controlled by majority Republican candidates. When that is the case, in the House of Representatives at the least, the Speaker of the House will be a representative from the majority party. The current Speaker of the House is Republican Mike Johnson, the leader of the House of Representatives. We will go into the powers of this position in just a moment, as they are expansive and they are following the Vice President in line to become the President of the United States. We also see within the House of Representatives there are additional structures, additional powers, and hierarchy positions. The Majority Leader, additional position granted to the Republican Party because they are the party with the majority of candidates within the House of Representatives. They have selected Steve Scalise to be the party leader elected by the majority. The minority has the power to elect a party representative as well, who acts as the minority leader, and this is currently a position held by Democrat Hakeem Jeffries. Now, beyond simple majority and minority leaders within the House of Representatives, we see positions called whips. These are aides to the majority and minority leaders of the House, and what they are tasked to do is they whip the vote when there is a bill provided by a representative of one of the two parties. They will bring it to the attention of the minority or majority leader, and the whips who work below them and with them will work diligently to get as many representatives within the House of Representatives to align with their side of the vote as they need before they bring the vote to the floor. Now, the general point to this, remember 435 members. Remember 2-year terms. Remember they're based on apportionment, and apportionment is based off of population. You can remember that it was capped in 1929. You could remember that the majority leader, that the majority party gets to pick a leader of the House of Representatives, which is the Speaker of the House, and that is currently held by Mike Johnson. Now let's talk about the Speaker of the House in more detail. So Mike Johnson, our current Speaker of the House, has maintained his post since October of 2023 after there was a vote to oust the Republican representative Kevin McCarthy from the position, led by a small collective of Republican legislatures within the House. Now, we see that this was a very uncommon event to happen in American history, as the Speaker of the House, for one, historically was always granted to the individual who had the senior most position. Simply put, the representative who had been in the House of Representatives the longest. They were almost, and that was also aligned with the majority party. They were almost always voted in as Speaker of the House. This changed during the mid-1900s as we saw some candidates being voted as Speaker of the House based on their merit, and we've seen that in recent years, based on their ability to appeal to the majority of representatives within the House. Sometimes this also brings conflict, as Republican Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy in 2023, brought forward a budget bill that budget reconciliation bill that did not align with the interests of a handful of members within his party who ousted him as the speaker. Mike Johnson has maintained that post since, and we have not seen any notable, well, through the scope of this lecture, we have not seen any notable occurrences, although every single day we have anybody in the Speaker of the House position, they are experiencing notable days. Now there are a wide range of responsibilities to this position. First off, I do want to point out that the Speaker of the House, if something were to happen to the President and the Vice President, the Speaker of the House is therefore the President. They are third in line or second in line, based on how you would count that, to become the President of the United States. But beyond this power, one of their most significant and impactful powers is their ability to appoint members to select committees. They have significant influence over the individuals that make up House Rules Committees, House Intelligence Committees, and Steering and Policy Committees. And additionally, Steering and Policy Committees are the committees that determine who acts and resides upon other committees. Now, you might be confused. What is a committee? Well, we will talk about the process of legislation in which you have to, for one, draft legislation, bring it to committees in which they debate it, they restructure it, and they vote upon it, and then it gets voted on in the entire House of Representatives or the Senate, and then it goes to the President. Those are the 4 steps to legislating. We'll go over in just a second. But that second step goes to committees. Committees consist of specific bodies of, say, 10, 15 elected representatives who debate specific issues. There are committees relating to, a good example would be an immigration committee. They specifically address bills relating to immigration. Now, you might also have a committee relating to, off the top of my head, diversity and equity. Now, say there are bills that have been brought forward that were relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion within the immigration sector. So if you had 2 different committees tasked with debating these issues, these bills, and you were the Speaker of the House, you have the power to determine which committee this bill goes to first. So you would say this DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion bill regarding immigration policy will be handed to an immigration committee or to the DEI committee. And you can see the debate about that bill would go in 2 very different directions based on which committee the bill is brought forward to. So in addition to the Speaker of the House being able to appoint members to those committees, they can determine which bills go to which committees. So those are 2 significant powers that influence the direction legislation goes once it's proposed and its ability to even get passed. Now, they also have the power to schedule legislation for floor action, which is general votes. We also see that the Speaker of the House has a significant role in the impeachment proceedings as they reside over the impeachment proceedings. They're the one with the gavel, the hammer, and they're yelling and making sure that everybody's in order. Extremely simplified right there. But and they will also interpret the rules of the House, specifically regarding debate, as they significantly influence how our representatives debate on the House floor. They also, as I said before, refer bills to the appropriate standing committees, and a significantly influential power, and they are second in line to become president after the vice president. Very important powers. Now, our current Speaker of the House is Mike Johnson. And if something were to happen to Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, we would then see Mike Johnson as president. That is not likely going to happen. We currently have Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, and with that comes the power to appoint members to select committees and determine which bills go to which standing committees, in addition to having control over the rules and processes of the House floor. Now, the Senate. In contrast to the House of Representatives, the Senate has a far less organized leadership structure. There are only 100 individuals, and we see that the Senate Majority Leader has far less influence than the Majority Leader in the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House. So we see, for one, they're far less organized. And 2, the Vice President has a significant role in the powers of the Senate. This is one of the checks the executive branch has over the legislative branch. Our Vice President is the President of the Senate. They act as the tie-breaking vote whenever we need. We have seen J.D. Vance enact a tie-breaking vote already, as he had enacted a tie-breaking vote for one of the cabinet appointments under Donald Trump in the last 2 weeks. I apologize, I forget specifically who he acted as a tie-breaking vote for. I believe it was Pete Hegseth. I'm not sure, not that relevant. Just a good example. We've seen presidents all throughout history, every single vice president enact multiple tie-breaking votes, as in a partisan Senate. You often see 50-50 split among the vote. Now, when we look at the leadership structures, we see, of course, J.D. Vance is the president of the Senate, but we also see the Senate Majority Leader, as Republicans are in the majority within our current Senate, as we have a united government. We see Representative John Thune, I believe, of South Dakota, and he is a representative for the majority party. And we, in contrast, see the Senate Minority Leader, Charles, also referred to Chuck Schumer, as the representative for the minority party. Now, we see that Senate Majority Leaders have the power to set the agenda generally. And we also see that they have the power. Sorry, I'm mumbling on my words there. To appoint select committee positions. Very few. There are not that many committee appointments that they are allowed to make, especially compared to the Speaker of the House. And they do manage and interpret Senate business and the Senate rules. So what are the primary differences between the two chambers? First off, I'm going to ask you this on the quiz, and I will want you to name at least two, hopefully three. So when we see these two bodies, we see that the key difference is the apportionment of representatives. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives, while there are only 100 members in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, these candidates maintain 2-year terms. In the Senate, this is a lot slower. They have 6-year terms, as they are more protected from the swings of partisan politics. In the House of Representatives, there are many local specific districts. Remember, I said Northwest Montana. A representative in the House of Representatives voted from Northwest Montana might not even consider the interests of Eastern Montana. Definitely won't consider the interests of New York City, but we see that they represent specific local districts, and there are many of them, for 435 of them. We see in the Senate, they are chosen from the entire state. We see a wider range of partisan perspectives within our senators because they have to appeal to wider populations, oftentimes rural and urban populations. And we see that the House of Representatives is based on population, as we see different amounts of representatives in each state. California will have far more than Wyoming, and of course, and the Senate, although California and Wyoming are very different states regarding their population size, they will both obtain 2 senators. These are the key differences. Please do not say anything regarding the saucer and teacup example, or how the House is more emotional. That will not count as one of the differences between the two chambers, but it is a way for you to conceptualize what these bodies are and how they operate. Now, let's talk about the lawmaking process. I won't even sip my coffee. It's so hard. I got to talk constantly. It's too much. So, when we think about the lawmaking process, generally, we know that representatives should defend the interests of their home district, constituent, state, and entire nation. And that is very important. Home district, constituents, their state, and their entire nation. Even a House representative who is voted by just Northwest Montana must consider, if they are a good representative, the interests of Southern Florida, or wherever it is in the nation. Now, we have a reading this week on earmarks. Earmarks are one of the powers given to our congressional representatives, and it enables them to add provisions in legislation to fund separate projects. Say you have a bill on, I'm trying to think of nonpartisan examples right now. Say you have an education bill. You're increasing funds to education, something along those lines. Don't worry about the details. These aren't real world examples. But in that bill, you're struggling to get enough support from the opposing political party. So, and you know the opposing political party wants more funding for healthcare. So you add an earmark to the bill that says $10 million of the budget for this bill will go to funding healthcare in the appropriate states. That would enable the opposing partisan representatives to vote for your bill. as they also get some concessions and some of their constituents' interests appealed to. So it can be at least a partial win for their constituents. Earmarks were banned around 2010 until recent years, for about 10 years, and they were done so. They did this because there was a drive for more transparency in Congress, more transparency in government. But one thing that coincided with this ban was a rapid increase in partisanship and the lack of bipartisan legislation. So they brought earmarks back to enable representatives to better debate issues and be able to have their interests appealed to more directly. We see that this brought an increase in bipartisanship, which is when legislative action is backed by both political parties. We also know that a key term that we will have to know throughout understanding government is a quorum. A quorum is just when you have the majority of representatives present to conduct business. You do not need every single representative in the House of Representatives to be present to vote on a bill. They don't all have to cast a vote, but you need a majority of them to be present for you to bring a vote on the House floor. So, and if you do not vote, we would see their vote as in it's like a no selection vote that would, and the requirement to pass legislation would still be the same, 51% of the entire elected body. So you need quorum to be able to vote, but you cannot pass legislation with a majority of just the representatives present. So we see, all right, yeah. Now let's talk about how a bill becomes a law with 4 very specific steps. Again, this is a great example of a question that if you Google it, it will not tell you 4 steps. It will tell you, it will include the steps within committees, but we know them generally. And for the scope of this class, there are 4 steps. So don't Google this question. It'll be obvious. I'll be very disappointed, and you'll just make me sad and make yourself annoyed when you're frustrated because I caught you. Just like those people using AI. So, all right, how do we pass legislation? Well, we all remember that Schoolhouse Rock about when a bill becomes a bill, when a bill becomes law, bill on Capitol Hill. If you haven't heard that, just Google Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. It's cute. It's a little bill singing around dancing. But the first step for a bill to become law is a bill must be proposed by an elected representative. So any member of Congress can do so. They propose legislation either in the House or the Senate. Let's just give the example of them proposing legislation in the House of Representatives. So when it is proposed, it will first go to a committee. Who has the power to determine what committee that bill goes to? The Speaker of the House. So we see in the House of Representatives, there are 23 House committees and 104 subcommittees. The Speaker of the House will examine the bill and refer it to the appropriate committee. Remember that example of DEI and immigration, inflammatory example, I know, but it's 2 completely not contrasting, but completely different issues that we have legislation that refers to both. And it's a good example of how a bill can go 2 very different directions based on which committee. So immigration committee, this bill could go, or a DEI committee, this bill could go to. And that could determine the direction that bill will go, whether it will die in committee, which most bills do. Most bills die in committee when they get debated upon. They determine that this is not valid enough to bring forward. So if a bill can make it through committee, in which a specific 10, 15 or so, it ranges based off of each committee, a number of elected representatives get to debate and alter this legislation, and then they vote within their committee. If it makes it out, it would then go to the House floor to be voted upon. The majority of House representatives must vote yes for this legislation to pass. They need to have a quorum present for the vote to be counted. Now, if it passes with a simple majority in the House of Representatives, it must then go to the Senate for the same process. It must also obtain a vote by the simple majority in the Senate as well. If the Senate alters that bill and in any way, even if it's just changing a word "and" to the word "or," anything like that, it must go back to the House for another vote. The final version of the bill, word for word, must be voted on by both bodies, the House and the Senate, before it can move on. We refer to that as one general step, obtaining the vote in the House and Senate floors. Understandable, right? Google will tell you that's 2 different steps. Now, fourth step to passing legislation is that if it is approved by both branches, the final version goes to the president's desk for consideration. The president can then sign this bill into law, or they can enact a veto, as we covered last week, whether they can do a regular or a pocket veto. Regular, they often include a veto message. They tell you why it's been vetoed. They say this will not go into effect, gets bounced back to Congress, or a pocket veto in which they silently sit on a bill until it dies. Now, we also have probably heard the term congressional immunities in the past when we talk about elected representatives. Well, there's a general understanding that representatives are immune from arrest while attending sessions and while traveling to and from those sessions. I always like to give the example. Well, let me actually read this quote for you directly. Freedom of speech and debate in Congress shall not be impeached or questioned in any court or placed out of Congress, and the members of Congress shall be protected in their persons from arrest and imprisonment during of their, it's cut off and I can't read it, of their going to and from and attendance on, except for treason, felony, or breach of the peace. So, a couple case studies. Can a representative speed on the way to Congress to enact their vote and then park horribly on the sidewalk in front of the congressional buildings? Technically, yes, they have immunities as they are going to and from Congress, the Congress to pass their vote. Now we also see that can a congressional representative be speeding on their way to cast their vote and hit a car so badly that there is possible manslaughter charges? No, they are not immune from that. Can a congressman simply play music as loud as they want in their house at 3 a.m., regardless of what their neighbors think? No, they cannot do that. Can they sell information to foreign nations? No, they do not have immunities from that. Can they say anything they believe is important to be said in a congressional hearing? Yes, they do have immunities from that, even if what they claim ends up to not be true at all times or adequately substantiated. So we see congressional immunities specifically refer to their actions while on the House and Senate floors and their goings to and from. This was enacted because early American history, you could see the ability for a local police officer in DC to simply pull over and hold up a representative who was on their way to vote the tie-breaking vote on a bill within the House or the Senate, and impede them from enacting that vote strategically. So this is intended to make sure that congressmen and women have the power to get to the House and Senate floors and cast their votes. Now, congressional committees. As we briefly mentioned before, this is where bills are truly debated. The second step out of 4 when it comes to how a bill becomes a law. So committees are tailored to address specific issues. We see a wide range of committees, and only a couple examples here, but we see the Agriculture Committee, Armed Service Committee, Small Business Committee, Budget Committees. We see some committees regarding immigration, wide range of committees addressing specific issues. We also see that committees can investigate issues of governance or the applications of legislation through oversight. So this is one of their powers, to make sure that legislation that relates to their specific collective is being enforced adequately. You see a lot of committees running oversight investigations and hearings. We saw there was an example of an oversight committee is when we saw the January 6th committee, and they were polling numerous individuals to be questioned in front of them. The representatives asking those questions came from a specific committee. I only mention that because that's an example of a hearing you have probably seen on TV or heard referenced, and we see that that wasn't an opportunity open for every House and Senate representative. It was granted to specific January 6th committee members. So this really does act as the ideal environment for bipartisan discussion, as the vast majority and the general focus when it comes to committees is to have representatives from both political parties. Partisanship has no place in congressional committees. We see that you have to have individuals that are well researched and have constituents that are greatly impacted by the specific issues they are debating and addressing. And you often see that this is where we actually have representatives having those detailed discussions that are away from the cameras, but do dive into the complexities of legislation, the cost benefits and detriments of each individual bill. So committees are where bills are truly debated, the second step in the 4 steps of drafting legislation, and we see these are ideal environments for bipartisan debate, and they have the power to enact oversight and oversight hearings. So now we're talking about Congress. Let's talk about the Senate specifically, and one of the tools granted to the Senate. We see this tool is referred to as the filibuster. This is a power granted to our senators in which they can enact unlimited debate on a bill or appointment. This can be utilized for cabinet appointments, federal judgeships, justices, or simple legislation like bills. Filibuster, again, unlimited debate, basically saying, I will stand here and speak until I am told that, well, I will speak until I can no longer physically speak, and you must listen. This was originally, this was not a part of our Constitution. I repeat, not a part of our Constitution, but was created in early American history as a tool to continue debate until a bill has been adequately discussed. Now, in order to end a filibuster, there is something called Rule 22, referred to as cloture. This is where you can have the debate and you can have a representative stop debating if 16 senators sign a petition requesting it and 3/5 of the total Senate, 60 senators, vote for it. Each senator can then speak for a max of 1 hour, and then they have to vote on what is being debated. Reconciliation, this is exclusively for budget bills, but it states that the House can send a budget bill to Congress with rules specifying that it cannot be filibustered. So once a bill makes it through the House, it cannot be filibustered within the Senate because of the urgency and the need for this budget bill. And it's only been utilized for budget bills, the need for this bill to be passed quickly or debated quickly. So we also see when we talk about the filibuster, a term we've probably heard if you've engaged with this issue much, the nuclear option. The nuclear option is when you limit or completely abolish the filibuster and replace it with a simple majority vote in the Senate. Now, this is only maintained for points in which there is significant delay and we cannot get a vote out otherwise. We have seen points in our history in which the filibuster has been used ad nauseum, one could say. We've seen representatives read from both sides of the political aisle, representatives from both parties, Democrat and Republican, read texts, read things like Jay-Z's lyrics, read things like Green Eggs and Ham. There was a funny clip that I like to play in my in-person class, and I picked this because it's just how poetic he reads the text of Ted Cruz reading Green Eggs and Ham. And it's just funny because of how passionately he reads it quite well. We have seen this form of time spending represented by, of course, both sides of the political aisle. There's a good clip of a Democrat reading Jay-Z lyrics, which just is comical because why does that have a place on our Senate floor? Now we also can look at let's continue on to the next slide as we talk about the history of the filibuster. So the filibuster, it is important to acknowledge it only exists within the Senate. It is not in our Constitution and was not a part of our founders' vision. It was originally intended to strengthen minority groups in Congress, and not what you would contemporarily think of minority groups, but minority groups as in issue position sentiments. There is a quote from a former senator, Alan Fruman, stating, quote, during my tenure, contained within the Senate was a critical mass of responsible adults cobbled from both parties who understood that yes, we can filibuster, but they exercised restraint. That critical mass of responsible adults has been replaced by a growing caucus of petulant infants, end quote. We can see that through this quote, the filibuster has garnered some significant criticism in recent years and has ebbed and flowed in its use as it was historically utilized with significant restraint. One of the time periods in which restraint was utilized optimally was during the Mansfield Senate, which was in the past, but Mansfield, you might know Mike Mansfield in Missoula, stemming from the Valley as a student at UM. Hopefully, we can all be following his paths and become great senators. We can generally thank Aaron Burr and John Calhoun for the existence of the filibuster. You don't have to remember this, but it's good for commentary. Aaron Burr, you might remember, as the person who killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel in the streets. Burr pushed for less rules in the Senate rulebook in 1806, right after being acquitted for killing Hamilton, actually, and then got rid of a rule that ended debate. A little while later, John Calhoun took advantage of this rule change and did what was referred to as one of the first filibusters. Now, the use of the first filibuster increased substantially during two primary periods. We'll go over that in just a second, but the Civil Rights era and contemporary partisan politics. The original word for filibuster came from a Dutch word referring to a pirate, which is just a fascinating little background. Now, this was, as I mentioned, often utilized to halt legislation during the Civil Rights era regarding issues, legislation for minority right interests. And we see, if we continue on, that the use of filibuster did peak in two specific eras, the civil rights and the modern era of heightened political polarization. Civil rights era, we saw that some of the most successful uses of the filibuster were relating to civil rights legislation, and we see, let me just one quick second. Okay, so in another time during contemporary politics. In contemporary years, we saw that, well, prior to contemporary years, the filibuster was used 82 times on judicial nominations during all presidents prior to 2008. And in 2008, during President Barack Obama's 2 terms in office, there was 86 uses of the filibuster on his judicial nominations, federal judges. As we know, that's one of the powers granted to our president. And with such an increase in the usage of the filibuster and such significant delays on getting federal judge positions filled due to the use of the filibuster, as we have seen, it was used more in Barack Obama's 2 terms than it was used in the entire in all of United States history prior. This led Harry Reid, a Democratic senator, to utilize the nuclear option on judicial appointments. And again, remember, the nuclear option removes the 60 vote requirement to end debate and instead makes it a simple majority vote. And this was utilized by Harry Reid, Democrat in 2013. We saw in more recent years, around 2017, I believe, Mitch McConnell expand the powers of the nuclear option to include Supreme Court justices. Harry Reid originally excluded the use of Supreme Court justices, citing that this is a too important office to allow for the filibuster, restrict the use of the filibuster from. Now that there's a lot of debate about the merits of Harry Reid's actions, Mitch McConnell's actions, or Aaron Burr's actions, John Calhoun's actions throughout history, the filibuster, a nuanced tool granted to the Senate. We also see the longest filibuster in U.S. history was led by an individual named Strom Thurmond, who led a 24-hour filibuster. And let me remind you, he stood on the Senate floor for 24 straight hours without a single break. He was during this filibuster read every single word of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and every single important federal document drafted by our founding fathers, Declaration of Independence, and much more. Additionally, he was known because he, before starting the filibuster, spent a few hours in a sauna to dehydrate himself so he would not have to go to the bathroom during his filibuster. Very fascinating. This occurred in the late 1950s. And then when you look at the civil rights era, another data point to illustrate how this was peaked, the use of this was peaked during the civil rights era, according to a study conducted by political scientists Sarah Binder and Stephen Smith, of the 30 measures that were derailed by the filibuster between 1917 and 1994, exactly half of them involved civil rights legislation. So we see that there was a deep connection between the use of this and that form of legislation. But since the early 1970s, senators have been able to use a silent filibuster anytime a group of 41 or more senators simply threatens a filibuster, which is if you were interested in this concept or wanted to write your paper about this, you would dive in depth on what a silent filibuster is, and you can email me and we'll go into detail on that, but I don't want to spend too much time covering that for the sake of everybody else. Okay, so let's talk about the Electoral College real quick. So the Electoral College consists of 538 representatives from all 50 states and DC. Now, we remember when we vote for the president, you need that special number of 270. And the first candidate to obtain 270 votes of the 538 Electoral College votes wins the presidency. Now, why are we talking about this when we're talking about a lecture on the legislative branch? Well, the members of the legislative branch directly influence the number of Electoral College votes. We get this through the number of national representatives in the House and Senate, plus Washington, D.C.'s representatives, because they are not a state. They do not actually obtain representatives, but they obtain votes within the Electoral College. And so we see 2 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators from Montana, results in Montana obtaining, in the most recent census, 4 Electoral College votes. Remember, in the past, we did not have the second House representative vote. So every state at the least has 3 Electoral College votes. We moved up a little bit and got our 4th, taking away one of California. So important to understand who makes up the Electoral College. It is our elected representatives determine the number of Electoral College votes. Now, when we cover elections and campaigns and political parties, we'll go into that detail regarding electors of the Electoral College cannot be sitting representatives. But we'll put that on the back burner for now. As you'll be able to see, it is not included in the What Do We Learn slides, and it is here for conversational sake, and it is a detail we will dive into later on. Now, let's review some of these checks on the legislative branch. Now, how can the judicial enact a check on the legislative branch? Well, they can determine the constitutionality of legislative decisions through rulings. They can determine that this law that was passed by the House, Senate, and signed by the President was unconstitutional, as they have to reference our Constitution and statutory law to do so. So that is a simple check that the judicial branch has on the executive and the legislative. Now, what can the executive branch, our president, and the cabinet, the bureaucracy, the governors, what can they do to act as a check on the legislative branch? Well, one, they can veto legislation that has been signed by both bodies, although if they get 2/3 majority in both bodies of the legislative branch, they can override a veto, but you rarely see that occurring. President can also make treaties and issue the executive orders that the legislative branch has to refer to. The president can also call special sessions in Congress in which they call for Congress to meet and discuss any specific issue. So we see that these checks on the legislative branch are frequently utilized and restrict the powers of our legislatures on a significant level. Now, what do we learn? Since we are already at an hour, I will not go into detail on each of these, but of course, if you email me, I'll ramble on forever regarding each of these questions. We can meet over Zoom. I'm here to help you study and learn this. That's my only focus. So here's my attempt to make this as direct as possible, give you direct questions to answer or goals to achieve. Sorry, talking for an hour gets your throat messed up. But of course, if you have any questions on these, just email me. I will respond right away and give you a breakdown of these questions. Now, here are the answers as well. And of course, I'm not going to spend too much time, but remember, answer the questions on the last slide with these answers. What is due this week? Make sure you go through your discussion posts. If that's confusing to anybody, email me. I'll give you another breakdown and explanation about how to do the posts. Remember, it is reliant upon even and odd number weeks. Odd number weeks, you have to post 3 posts, an original post and 2 follow-ups on your classmates, just asking them questions, engaging with them. Your original post has to be engaging itself. You have to present a position, reference some content from the lectures. Really do your best to defend your position responsibly and respectfully in an academic environment. And I'm going to critique you on, not grade you heavily, but give you some pointers on how to do that more professionally and to the best of your ability, because we all have a lot of room to grow. So I'm going to have a little bit of criticism here, but it's all, take it with a grain of salt. You're already doing good if you've contributed to the discussion at all. And it is week 6, so you're going to be doing a follow-up to your original post. You're going to make sure that you've responded to your classmates' questions adequately. Now go through the week's readings. We also have an assignment this week related to the week's readings. It's a very simple assignment, very, very quick and direct. It just asks you a handful of simple, straightforward questions. Who is the Speaker of the House? The readings from the week have all those answers. And this is my cat Mush. She is kind of a mean cat, but she plays fetch. It is cool. I don't know how she does it, but she will play fetch with her toys, bring them back and everything. It's adorable. All right. If you have any questions, email me, reach out. We got this. Don't try and go at this alone. We're a team. You just got to let me know what you need and you will get it right away. Hi, Mush. You having a good time? Well, we say goodbye and wish you good luck this week. Reach out with any questions, thoughts, or concerns. We got this. Don't go at it alone.